This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they will appear here in my chat room, which I have on screen today since I don't have a guest, and we can talk directly. I hope you're having a good week so far. Yesterday we had a best of episode. I had a cardiologist appointment yesterday. Went to that basically when I would otherwise have been on the air. Got a very good report. Apparently, I'm doing quite well, and I'm quite happy to say that. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about Odin's Eye, probably for the last time, or at least the last time for a while. And also, yesterday was my mother's 97th birthday. I'm wearing her lucky frog brooch today to honor her. And also the day that Odin's Eye left the Earth's orbit. And hello to Unique One in the chat room. It's good to see you, Unique One. So, Odin's Eye. Odin's Eye was all about prophecy and seeing what is hidden. And I think if we look back over the last 2-month period, we would pretty much all agree that we saw a lot of things that were not otherwise obvious before the start of that period. I certainly did. And I would imagine everyone else had the same effect. Everyone I know and have talked to about it has said the same thing. It brought a lot of hidden things to the surface. It revealed particularly problems in situations, unresolved issues, things like that. The legend of Odin's Eye is that Odin sacrificed his eye to gain universal wisdom. Hello to Bimby in the chat room. And the thing that made his eye a desirable sacrifice was that it could see much farther than an ordinary eye. It could see things that you could not ordinarily detect. And he removed it from himself as an offering. Now, one of the things that has come out about the Odin's Eye asteroid quite recently, certainly not at the start of this, is that it is not a random asteroid. It is made from the same materials as the Earth and the Moon. And the theory is that it is a remnant of the Moon's collision into Earth that caught the Moon in the Earth's orbit. And this adds a great deal more symbolism to the meaning than was originally there. Because it's not merely the addition of a second moon, but the return of what was part of the original construction. Also, in terms of Odin removing his eye as a sacrifice, this is a part of our planet and lunar system that's been sent out into space and returned to us, which makes it more logical to me why it had such a profound effect, and I feel that it did. If you feel differently, please let me know. But I think that we saw a lot of things that we would not otherwise be aware of, and that it exposed a lot of perhaps misconceptions, and not necessarily individually in every person's life, but enough that I think every person saw some of it. And that's really quite remarkable. And I am very curious to know when this particular comet is expected to return again and repeat this this orbit. And I believe I heard it said that has been calculated, but I don't have the number in front of me. But I think that astrologically we need to pay attention to that in the future because it was, in fact, a profound revelation, in my opinion. So that's part of my final comments on Odin's Eye, that it was more intrinsic to our system than we first realized, and that we need to pay attention to it in the future. Now, I also want to say one of the things we worked on early in the orbit of Odin's Eye was attuning to that ability to see farther and to bring through prophecies, which of course is something we naturally do, but attuning to this superior vibration of that to improve our own abilities. And I certainly worked on that. Hopefully you did as well. We did a little bit here on the program. And I think that we may see greater success in our clairvoyant workings, our oracular workings as we go forward. Even though, I mean, many of us have been quite successful right along, I think that we may see it becoming a little stronger. It's certainly an interesting time that we are living in. And of all the things that I might have expected to lead into it, a temporary second moon was not one of them. And I'm still quite impressed by that little turn of cosmic humor, and how suddenly it came upon us. Now, there have been all kinds of other things going on astrologically this last year, including the Pluto return of the United States, which is a big deal astrologically. There are many things still going on. We are not living in an inconsequential time. We're living in a time where we must expect to see significant change. And as I always say, if we want to be part of that change, then we must be the change we wish to see. It's not going to happen without us. And I think that we're going to see increasing change at this time. We need to ask ourselves, both individually and in our various communities within the larger metaphysical community, what do we wish to see? And having dealt with that issue, we then need to take those actions. We are past the point that we have very long periods to think about this. We are at the point that action is necessary. And hello to Ed the Pagan in the chat room, who says, yes, I agree. For a lot of us, that is building up our bases locally and otherwise, making sure we have the things we need to survive through the future. It certainly is important for us to look to our civil rights and do everything we can to maintain them. It is certainly important to us as a community to make sure that we can physically withstand changes in the wider world. And one of those may be interruptions in food supply. I know there are lots of people who are quite excited about the idea of large tariffs being imposed on food brought in from outside the country, but I have to tell you that may significantly interrupt the food that you're used to getting. It may be something that can also, over time, adjust itself, but certainly in the short run, it's going to be problematic for a lot of people. We do not naturally have strawberries in December in most of the Northern Hemisphere. But we're used to having them in our stores because we bring them in from outside. Interrupting that chain is going to make a big difference. Granted, strawberries is a small thing to focus on. But I think you'll find there are some larger things. What do we do about that? Well, we make sure we have our own resources. We make sure that we have our own local resources. Something I think that we're going to want to focus on is the idea of urban gardening, the idea of using our spaces to grow our own food and not be dependent um, on what is supplied to us by um, large companies. Because I'm not particularly sure they're going to hold up well to these challenges. I think we're going to find, um, and Ed the Pagan says, bananas, which I assume is a reference to the fruit. And could be other things, but I assume it's a reference to the fruit. But that's a very good example. Where do bananas come from? We don't grow them much in Illinois, and we certainly don't grow them in December in Illinois. And yet we're accustomed to finding them in our stores. And that's because we bring them in from elsewhere. But they're about to cost a great deal more. Um, and so the question becomes, how do we deal with that? If you're accustomed to having December bananas, oh, and Edward points out that no bananas are grown in the United States. Um, so, we have to expect that the prices on these things are going to rise considerably. And American business being what it is, once they've risen, they will not go back down, even if the cost goes back down later. Um, we've seen that again and again and again, and talked about that a lot this year, about how high the grocery prices have been, while the companies have been making record profits and could have kept them low if they'd chosen to. But that's just not how they work. And so once these prices go up, they're not likely to come down. And Unique One points out produce in general. And this is true, especially in the winter months. So what do we do? Well, one of the things we can do is grow our own. The technology exists to do it. Greenhouses have been widely used for a long time, and they can be used in urban settings. A lot of the things that may now be harder to obtain may be easier to produce. And as communities, I think we need to be looking at that option. And we also need to be aware that this will not receive a friendly reception from corporate interests, who are probably looking forward to charging higher prices. But it can be done. And I think we need to look into how we can step in to filling the vacuum that will be created by these policies. And we can, if we're willing to undertake it. Urban gardening has had a history now of 30, 40 years, and a lot of development, and certainly a lot of proof that it works very well. The question is, are we willing to do it? As a culture, we've shown that we're not willing to do it. Several years ago, there was a huge push for it, and then a huge push back against it. But as individuals, as communities, are we willing to do it? That's another question. And I think in the pagan community, very often, we romanticize the idea of growing food. Growing food is a lot of work. There's a lot of effort involved in it. And so the idea of stepping in to fulfill some of these needs is not something that does not involve effort, but it is potentially a very practical and empowering thing to do. And one of the things I've talked about, as we've talked throughout this last year about Project 2025 and the rise of Christian nationalism, is the potential of Christian nationalists to move against our communities But if we're producing a certain amount of the food that they want, we're less likely to be moved against, in my opinion. Doesn't mean we won't be, but less likely. And Ed the Pagan points out that Mark Brown runs a full farm, and yes, he does. And also setting up CSA. And yes, absolutely, this can be done. Look at um, the Southern Delta Church of Wicca and what they do. Mark Brown and what he does. We could step in and fill a great deal of need at this time over the next year or 2 years if we choose to do that. And I think that we really should be looking at that. I think it would be a very practical thing for us to do. Of course, being a practical thing leaves out about 2/3 of the pagan community who avoid practicality at all costs, but there is still the 1/3 that might do it. And I really think that it's something we should be looking at. I also want to say, for individuals, although I've never been um, in prosperous times a great fan of back porch gardening, in difficult times, I think it's a very valuable thing that we may want to start looking into. There are a lot of ways to help to augment your own food sources in your own home without a huge amount of work if you look into it in advance and are prepared for it. And as the pagan says, in the face of climate change, it will be crucial as well. And yes, it will. We are going to have to prepare for a lot of changes in how these things are working in the future versus how they worked in the past. You know, I can tell you, I am old enough to remember when fruit had to be bought in season. And when it first started showing up in American grocery stores out of season. And that was quite a remarkable thing. Young people don't have a clue what I'm talking about. Um, but they may in the next year or so. And we may find it necessary to learn how to eat seasonally again. I don't know that I'm happy about that, but at least I do remember what it is and how to do it. And we may find ourselves having to look back at what our grandparents did in an earlier age to be able to deal with what becomes available to us, because it is likely going to change, both because of climate change and because of policy changes. If we're not importing many of these fruits and vegetables, then we're not going to have them in the same amount in the off season, and may not have them at all. The one that both Ed the Pagan and I are most concerned about is coffee, of course, but I think we have to assume that's going to go up in price significantly. But you know, I also remember the 1970s when there were coffee shortages and sugar shortages and meat shortages. Um, and, you know, we survived all of that. And we'll see what happens in these coming months. We'll see how we manage to deal with the changes in our food supply that at this point are unquestionably coming. It's just a matter of what they're going to be and how we deal with them. One way of dealing with them that's very important to remember is to be adventurous in your eating, something that is not a problem for me for the most part. When we had in the 70s all of these different shortages, we turned to other foods to fill the place. And for me, that's not a problem. For some people who have very limited palates, it may be. And Ed the Pagan says coffee is also under threat from a global fungus that has appeared. Alas. It does kind of raise the question, how will we survive that? But we'll find a way. During the world wars, there were great coffee shortages, and people looked for other things to use to replace coffee. I imagine we'll be doing that again. Um, and did anything actually replace it? No, none of the things they created did. But that doesn't mean we might not be able to come up with something good now. And it does mean there are other things out there. It's going to be a very interesting time. And I think that although the Odin's Eye has left the planetary orbit, its effect of bringing hidden things to the surface is going to continue for a while, simply because it's set the process in motion, and it's certainly not complete yet. So I think we need to expect that we're going to see a lot of things we, for the most part, might not have been aware of. One of them is what I'm talking about now, where the food actually comes from. I think most people in this country don't have a clue. And I think they're going to be very surprised as it becomes more evident. I think a lot of younger people don't realize that all these foods that we've enjoyed year round are not produced by us, because we cannot produce them in this amount year round, and in some cases cannot produce them at all. And hello to Steve in the chat room. It's good to see you. And I think that through the influence of Odin's Eye, we're going to see it in the future. I think we also, and Ed the Pagan says, and now Mercury retrograde follows, and also Pluto in Aquarius. Yes, we are now in Mercury retrograde, which of course has some people hiding under their beds. I am not one of them. But Mercury retrograde is a thing. It's just not the thing some people try to make it out to be. But things that involve Mercury may be challenged during this time. And Pluto in Aquarius, we talked about that, I believe, last week. Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto is a very powerful planet to have in a sign. And it tends to create revolutions in the qualities of that sign as they express in society. Pluto is the planet that through the 20th century was most commonly associated with revolution. Although it's important to remember it's always in some sign, but it's just moved into Aquarius. And what does that mean? Well, Aquarius is a very interesting sign. And it has some wonderful qualities and some miserable qualities, like every other sign. But what Aquarius is not is the 1960s kumbaya fantasy that you heard so often during that generation, who thought that the coming of the age of Aquarius was going to be an ideal paradise. All I can say is they must not have known very many Aquariuses. Now, Ed says the last time this was the case was during the revolutions in the United States and France. And yeah, a very revolutionary period, very revolutionary planet. And, when I first started to study astrology, Pluto was looked on by some astrologers as basically a negative influence. I don't think it's generally seen that way now, and I don't see it that way now. But it is a matter of how you look at it. It does bring forth change and challenge wherever it goes. And Aquarius is a sign that is very idealistic, very innovative, very given to new ideas, and very concerned with the improvement of self and society. So we'll see a lot of effect in those areas. And Steve says, as sung by the group Fifth Dimension, I remember. I love that song, um, but it's a very rose-tinted song. And um, the negative side of Aquarius, I once heard, and I remarked on this last week, very well described by an Aquarius as being that Aquarius is like the perfectionistic director who's worked out exactly how the film should be shot, but forgotten to give anyone their scripts, and then gets surprised when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing because they didn't know they were supposed to be doing it. At a societal level, that's going to be very interesting. Um, so I'm very curious to see what Pluto in Aquarius brings us. It looks like I'm going to survive much of that period. I almost missed it, but it looks like I will be seeing it, and so I will certainly be taking notes. It's interesting to see what Pluto in Capricorn did. Um, it basically took society back about 50 years. Aquarius may move us forward just as far, or it might move us sideways. It remains to be seen. And with that, I want to take a moment for a word from our sponsors. Why? Because we love our sponsors. And here we go.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And we're back. And our next Metaphysical and Magic auction will be on Black Friday. And I am hoping for it to be quite a spectacular auction. I hope you will join us for that. And we have come to the end of our program. I think I will probably not be doing any further programs dedicated to the Odin's Eye for obvious reasons, but I'm quite certain it will be mentioned again because I think it's going to be an ongoing influence even while its orbit has ended. And that's because of the things that have begun during that orbit. So I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back again tomorrow, and we will have tomorrow our guest Chris Copeland discussing what's new at Corellian Publishing. I will not be here on Thanksgiving Day, but I will have a best of program talking about Thanksgiving Day from a Corellian perspective. And I hope that if you happen to be watching on that day, you'll enjoy it. And of course, I'll be back on Friday. So I wish you a wonderful day, and let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you bring us in our lives, and we rejoice in the ability to look at the stars and planets and the patterns of time that they indicate, to help us to better understand the things that are going on around us. We ask you to help us to adapt ourselves to the energies of the universe, that they may help to propel us forward rather than holding us back. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and knowing you are always with us. We thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And I'll see you again